A growth marketer, what they have to do is they need to have creative insights in experiments that they could be doing. So if you only have someone in your team that does advertising, they're probably only going to think of advertising stuff. So I think that broad view is important.
Welcome to today's episode of How Startups Grow. With this podcast, we help founders launch and run a successful startup by giving them actionable insights that help them succeed. This podcast is brought to you by Performato, the startup marketing agency. This is How Startups Grow.
Welcome to today's episode of How Startups Grow. Last time we talked about growth hacking and growth marketing. What is it? What is actually the difference between them? Today we're going to talk about how you're going to build the growth team. So how do you actually hire? Which people do you hire? How do you set up the team for success? Let's get right into it.
What are the key roles and responsibilities when building a growth marketing team from scratch?
So when you're building a growth marketing team, you are doing mainly marketing experiments. So you need the marketing basics in there. So you need a leader of the team, you need a copywriter, a visual designer, and someone that's okay with data. Now, these people, sometimes you find a copywriter that also does data or a data analyst that's also the leader, but these are the basic ones you always need. Then sometimes you also need some extra people, such as advertising specialists, SEO specialists, email marketers, etc.
So when we're talking about growth hacking, how does it differ when you're building a team in growth hacking?
Yeah, in growth hacking, you're doing experiments in marketing as well as sales and product and potentially other things as well. So you would still need the designer, you still need the data analyst, and you still need the leader of the team. But you often need developers, software developers, salespeople, marketers separate from that as well in the team, which means the team gets a little bit bigger as well. And also sometimes people work part-time in those teams as well.
Is there like a common size for growth hacking teams?
Good question. I would say the minimum size would be 3 people. You can do it with less, but it's not recommended.
What specific skills are essential for growth marketeers, and how do they differ from growth hackers' skill sets?
Yeah, so a growth marketer, what they have to do is they need to have creative insights in experiments that they could be doing. So if you only have someone in your team that does advertising, they're probably only going to think of advertising stuff. So I think that broad view is important. Other than that, they need to be able to adapt, to learn quickly, because there's a lot of tools that you could be using. There's a lot of different tactics you could use. So you need a lot of adaptability in the team. And I think that is the number one skill, actually, adaptability within the team for growth hacking.
Would you say it's more effective to have generalists or specialists in these teams?
I would say that in a small company, you would probably have more generalists because you simply don't have the budget to hire a designer, a copywriter, a performance marketer, and etc., stuff like that. Now, in a larger team, you have some more specialists, but I would actually recommend to also have some generalists in there as well, especially the leader of the growth team. A generalist is actually a bit better for that than a specialist.
So when the team grows, you should have more specialists, maybe a few generalists, and in the start, you start with more generalists.
Exactly, just like that.
What should companies look for when hiring their first growth marketeer or growth hacker?
So I would look for someone with more broad skills, more broad experience, someone with different backgrounds. It's actually good if you hire someone for, let's say, a fintech company. That person has also had experience with maybe publishing or other types of SaaS or whatever, because that broadens their view. And a lot of growth hacking is about creativity. So that's what you're actually looking for primarily in these people. And then also the adaptability that I just mentioned, they need to be tech savvy. That's an important one. That's what I would look for.
I can also imagine that a startup already has a marketing team. If they want to evolve into more growth marketeers, would you advise them to train their team, or would you advise to hire someone in-house from outside?
Yeah, you can do it actually in both those ways, and they're both fine. Now, if you have people in your team that would be capable and willing to learn growth marketing, then that might work really well. They have experience with your organization. But sometimes it is quite hard to take someone out of their current role and then add them into something else. I would keep in mind that if you promote someone or change someone's job from a marketer to a growth marketer, you have to take them out of their old job and put them into the new job. And otherwise, they're not going to be able to actually do the experiments and spend the time that's required.
So if a company decides to train their team in-house, How would you advise them to, would they hire a coach or should they go through some kind of specific training or?
I would hire a coach and I would do the training. I have done projects myself in the past, actually, where I was hired as a growth coach and trainer in teams. There's one example that comes to mind in the publishing industry. They had a growth hacking ambitions. So we were working with the marketers, with the salespeople, with the product people. And the team in the end came down to 6 people, if I remember correctly. Now, one of the things we wanted to look for is which of these 6 is actually able to do the growth thing in there. So the experimentation, rapid experimentation even. And then also, is someone in this group capable of becoming the growth leader as well? Because you need someone to lead the team as well. That's something that worked really well that I would actually recommend to do.
But how long did it take for them to get up to speed and be really good in it was growth marketing or growth hacking?
Growth hacking, I think it took them about 6 months. It's not a short, quick fix that you can do if you're training inside people. Now, some things that made it less efficient for them was that these people also had their regular job still. So they were not just growth-oriented people or growth team members. Now, this does save you some money because you don't have to hire new people. You can just take people you already have. But it also slows you down a little bit, which in growth hacking is not that great. But I do understand the choice, of course, because that way you don't have to hire an entire new team.
Yeah. I can also imagine if you already have a team in marketing and you want to implement growth marketing, for example, it's also difficult to have both of these teams working together. So it's better to replace the team maybe or train them.
Yeah, I would say that especially with growth marketing, I would put the role of the growth marketeer in the marketing team. And with growth hacking, I would actually take the team separate from the teams and make it more interdisciplinary and have them just do a different job. In a way, you could say that the growth people are explorers that try to find new ways to grow the company. And then the regular team members, they are focused more on execution and doing the execution really well, actually.
We've spoken about you training a company in growth hacking, and it took up to 6 months, but these 6 months you were already implementing those things, or it was just only the training?
No, it was the entirety. So we started actually doing about 2 weeks of training. So there were like 4 trainings in those weeks. Then we did some workshops to get them started and built the idea backlog. And then we did the last, I think it was a little over 5 months, was just working with them. And then I took the role of the growth leader to guide them through and coaching them through as well. And then after that time, they assigned a different person to become the growth leader. And there was a moment of transition there as well, where I was still helping out, of course, but they were getting more used to doing it on their own as well. But do know that when we got started with this, so during those 6 months, we already started seeing results, of course. It's not just training and talking, it's actually doing as well.
Got it, yeah. So what were the results after those 6 months of training in growth hacking?
Yeah, so they are part of a multinational company. They have a branch in the UK, they have a branch in the US as well. And the specific results, I don't have like the number of X that grew to Y or whatever. But I do know that after implementing growth hacking, the Dutch branch is severely outperforming the US and the UK branch. So they are performing much better than the other branches, which didn't implement growth hacking. So you can see a little bit there that there has actually been an impact in that as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So I can also imagine that some startups want to hire a growth marketeer or growth hacker from outside who has more experience. Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that new hires align with the company growth vision and objectives from day one? So
if you're just starting growth hacking, you have the benefit that there is no strategy yet. So they can create that strategy and vision themselves if you hire a good leader. Now, if you already do have one, it's about taking them through this during the job interview process, of course. But also, I think if you hire a growth leader, they should have say in that strategy and that vision. So if there are parts that they disagree with, then do ask them to mention it and ask them to say why and ask them to come up with alternative strategies, for example.
So what are some effective ways to onboard new growth team members, especially in a fast-paced startup?
I would train them by introducing them to their network of stakeholders. So a lot of growth teams have to work with the people from the regular teams as well. You have to know the managers, you have to know the decision makers. They would have to know the tool set So which tools are we using in terms of models? Which tools are we using in terms of software? And then I think the best way of getting them up to speed is just having them work and giving them a lot of coaching and maybe pairing them up with other team members that are already there.
Okay. So in terms of growth hacking, I can imagine that some startups, different departments, they work more on themselves. But if you implement growth hacking, they also have to start working together maybe more, right?
Yeah.
How do you shift from that? How do you start making these departments work together?
Yeah, it's mainly leadership buy-in. If the leadership thinks that they should do it, then they can facilitate it and get started. Other than that, it helps to figure out which people are the sponsors and which people don't like the idea of growth hacking. And then I would actually say that the people that are sponsors should be involved in the growth team sometimes. So something you could do as an example here is if you're just starting growth hacking and you have a designer in the product team that wants to collaborate, then invite them to collaborate because they're going to bring the product team on board as well even. So that's something I would look for as well there.
How important is experimentation and data-driven decision-making in the daily operations of these teams?
That's almost everything they do, with one addition, which is figuring out what they have learned and then implementing that throughout the rest of the company as well. You could have a split between the growth team, like I said, being the explorers, and the other team being the regular team that does execution really well. I think that split, that's the key difference here. So the growth hacking team, it's actually really fun in my opinion. You just get to try out things, and if they work, you can tell that to the people who do the heavy lifting, the execution, the quality work basically, that hey, we learned this and experiments have shown that we have achieved this growth with that. Can you help us implement it and can you manage it? And I think that sets up an interesting form of collaboration as well.
Yeah. How do you balance creative brainstorming with data analysis to drive growth initiatives in both growth hacking and growth marketing?
Yeah, so I think creative brainstorming, there are levels of maturity to that, and there are levels of maturity to data analytics as well. And combining the two, data and creativity, that could be hard sometimes. Now, let's say the level of maturity is in data. Some people don't use data at all. Some people look at data, but they only look at it after doing something, so they don't look before. Then you have people that look at data before and have like ideas how they can use it. And then there are people that have all this data available and make decisions beforehand based on the data. Those are 4 levels of maturity in data. The more mature, the more of a role data can play in this decision making. Now, with creativity, there's also some things. Sometimes it is gut feeling. Some people look at outside organizations and try to copy or change things from that. Other people are trying to just improve what they already have. And then there's also people that have a completely open mind that have creative ideas that are more out of the box as well. With the creativity, you're looking for those type of people. And if you have both those type of people in your team, then you get to combine data and creativity as well. But the growth leader needs to know both creativity and data because they are the one that needs to create the bridge between the two.
So you were talking about out of the box thinking, but there's also something about not reinventing the wheel, right? How do you manage the balance in that?
Yeah, I think you would start with, there's actually a framework for this that you can use. There's many frameworks, but let's say this one, there is the ICES framework, which stands for Impact, Confidence, Ease, and Scalability. Now you can use these 4 terms to define how great an experiment would be to do. Now, if it's something that you know works, not reinventing the wheel, for example, because you've done it in the past or whatever, the confidence is going to be high and those experiments are going to get higher priority. That's how you can do it. Now, I would also recommend to always do the things that you're more confident about first as a growth team, because there's a lot of insecurity within the company of the growth team. Are they going to get results or are they just going to mess around and do a bunch of experiments? If you do things that you're confident of, you can show the others as well. Hey, we did these experiments and they're working. Look, we have proof. That's another reason why I would recommend with that starting with that actually.
What metrics and KPIs should growth teams focus on when measuring their success?
I would say the amount of experiments they're doing and the hit rate which means how often are their assumptions actually true. Now, on the first one, the amount of experiments, I think that's an interesting one. There's a famous quote by Jeff Bezos about this for Amazon. And he says that the success and growth of Amazon is directly linked to the amount of experiments they do. Do know these are quality experiments. So you can't change the button color 50 times in a week. But the amount of experiments, that matters quite a bit for growth hacking.
How do you set realistic goals for these teams, especially when dealing with limited resources?
Yeah, I would say use the first 3 months to set a benchmark and then try to improve it. So after 3 months, you're going to figure out how many experiments per week this team can do. And then you should set a target for them to improve the amount of experiments that they're doing per week while maintaining the quality of the experiments. Or if they do a lot of experiments, but they're always wrong, you can set a target for, hey, we want you to be right more often. So we're going to increase the hit rate that you need to achieve.
So we've spoken a little bit about the balance in the growth hacking teams or the growth marketeer teams as well. As a company grows, how should the growth team evolve?
Yeah, this is interesting because a growth team, you can implement it in several ways. You can have the interdisciplinary growth team that's in the company itself, right, already. So you can take people from the marketing team, from the sales team, from the product team, and you can say, hey, your function is to do this. Now we also want you in the growth team. So we ask you to do both. This is usually the first step that people take, that companies take. Then another step might be to hire a dedicated growth leader that's not part of any of the teams, that just does this, that just facilitates this all. Then there's the mixed model where you hire some full-time employees that are always required, like I said, the data analyst, the visual designer, the leader. And then for the rest, you take resources from the existing company. Then there's the model where you have one singular growth team that does all growth experiments. Now, this is when you're already quite mature as a company. And then when you go to the absolute next level, you can have growth teams focused on specific challenges. An example could be that you have a growth team just focused on onboarding, a growth team just focused on customer acquisition, a growth team just focused on retention. That is like the final stage you can do with growth hacking teams as well.
I can also imagine that if those teams scale, there might be some challenges in their growth.
If your growth team scales, there are going to be challenges. And it's often a question around, are there enough creative ideas based on data to do experiments? Because if you suddenly have a team with 20 people, not 20 people, let's say you have a growth team of 3 people and it grows to a team of 8 people, you're going to do way more experiments. So you need a lot more ideas for that as well. Now, that's one of the things that you can run into. Another one could be that you are lacking creativity and you want to scale the growth team, but there's not enough ideas to actually do this. That could be an issue. And an issue could be collaboration with team members as well, because you're increasing the size of the team. It's going to add people meeting as well. There's a good chance that the amount of experiments per employee that you're going to be doing, interesting metric, I think, to focus on, but that is going to go down as well if your growth team increases in size.
Is it true that, let's say you have a growth team, they do the first part, and if they have also like a traditional marketing team, they will just hand over the stuff that works, and then they can scale it up? Is that something?
You could do it like that. Yeah. Yeah. So what I mentioned, the strengths of the growth team and those members, it's more focused around creativity, exploration, finding out what works. Now, a lot of the times, these people that are more creative by their nature or by their experience, they are often not that good at executing and executing at a standard level that just gets repeated over and over again. They might even get bored of that, and that's why they go into a growth team. And then you have some marketeers, for example, and using marketing as an example, it could be product or sales as well, that are really good at executing, but not that great at coming up with new ideas. So they would just repeat what they're already doing. They go for operational excellence, you would say. And if you get both of those working together like this, one in the growth team, one in the execution team, that is actually a really good combination, in my opinion.
Could traditional marketing ever beat growth marketing?
I think they're different. I think they're very different. I think growth marketing in the context of marketing would be in addition to the marketing team. So the growth marketing team, or the growth marketeers, you could say, will make the regular marketeers way more effective at their job. So I don't think it's about beating them. And the same is true for growth hacking, by the way. The growth hacking team works for the company and allows the company to explore new ideas. But then the rest of the company still has to do the execution. So there it's also, you have to explore it. And that's the growth team.
But are all bigger corporations already implementing growth hacking, or are there also some of them who don't?
There's a lot that don't do it, actually. And that comes down to reasons of trust issues where they're not sure if it's going to work for them. And also they can't set like a very hard target, like very strict target for the growth team, because it needs to be adaptable as well. And then I think another issue that's there is that these are not the traditional roles that these larger, more longer existing companies are used to. You're suddenly looking at creatives that are exploring new things instead of people that are doing things correctly. And what these companies worry about a lot of the times is damage to their brand, which is actually a legitimate concern, because a growth team might want to do an experiment that does not align with the company style. They might want to test a different, I say color now, you can test a different color. You can also test a different tone of voice, a different way of mentioning the value proposition. Larger companies often have rules, and growth hackers and rules do not align that much.
Yeah. So would you also advise for those bigger corporations to not implement this, or?
I would advise them to try it for sure. I've had really great experiences with larger companies that did implement this. Now, do know that you don't have to go full modern growth hacking startup mode in a larger corporation. You can just set up an innovation team, for example. And an innovation team, it does the same thing as a growth team would do, but it already sounds a bit more corporate. So you have optics working in your favor. And then also, a lot of times with these corporates, I don't use the term growth. I use the terms innovation, validation, stuff that are more about secure terms instead of growth hacking, which sounds hacking like you're doing some technical trick or something.
And when you were training this company, this team, what were the biggest lessons you've learned from training them?
Yeah, so they didn't have a person in the group that was actually capable of becoming the growth hacker, the growth leader at that time. So they had to hire a new person to do that. So these companies cannot force fit, and a new person was actually very useful there that immediately was able to take on that role. Other than that, collaboration was sometimes a big challenge with them, because these are people that have their job built on safety in a way and process, doing the same kind of thing and knowing what it's going to bring. And then in comes this team that has done like some experiments and shows them like, hey, you need to change everything because here's data, we tried it and this is the result. It caused, I wouldn't say like full out conflict where it was very direct, but it did cause a lot of people to not want to work that well with the growth team, because they were basically telling them that they were doing the wrong things, which I know can be annoying as well. Yeah.
How do you see the role of growth teams evolve in the future?
Yeah, I think growth teams are often used right now in the SaaS industry, for example, and a lot in software technology type of things. Fintech are using it a lot. I think growth hacking could adapt by finding its corporate form, which I think is through innovation, through validation, things that I mentioned already. So I think that's a development. And then I also think that the existing people that do marketing, product, sales, whatever, I think they can learn a bit from growth hacking. Because I think if you are that operational excellence person, you don't have to be, and I don't think you should be only doing that. I think you should have an open mind for new ideas anyway. And I think that's something that has to change. And I think that's something that's already changing as well. If you look at a marketing job ad, for example, if you look at it for an advertising specialist or email marketer, you're always going to find on there that they're looking for someone that's creative, that wants to do A/B testing, which are growth hacking skills as well. So I think they're emerging a little bit right now, and I think that could be a really interesting development as well.
For A/B testing, we've also spoken in a different episode about how AI could influence us, a little bit of more creativity and new ideas in it. Do you think AI also has an influence on this?
I think you could use AI really well in growth hacking. I think you could use it for ranking experiment ideas based on data. because then the team can just be creative and then have the AI rank them based on the data. I think that could be an interesting thing. And I also think with growth hacking, you don't have to be as perfect as operational excellence people would be, which means that you can use AI to create, I want to say the shortcut, but it shouldn't be messy, but you can do it a bit faster and you can use AI. You should actually probably leverage AI to do more experiments as well. Yeah. As long as they're quality experiments, of course.
Yeah. So as a final question, if a startup who's really small wants to start with growth hacking, could you give them like a summary how they can best start this?
I would hire a generalist growth hacker with experience that's able to set up some experiments. I would empower them to also have access to existing resources within the team so that you can actually get the resources behind it as well. Or alternatively, I would hire a growth hacking agency, which of course I say because I own a growth hacking agency, and they can help you setting up the experiments and executing the experiments as well. This could be useful because then it's outside of your company and you can get started a lot quicker with people who already have experience doing it.
And what about a scale up that's ready to implement growth hacking?
If it's implementing growth hacking, it would start with the same thing. So hiring a growth leader and assigning resources to the growth team. You can also still use the agency route with that as well to build that team for you and train them and have them working with your organization. If it is building an existing team in a scale up and making that size bigger, then I would say you should focus on upping the amount of experiments you can do. And for that, you might need to split the growth team in two and create two teams. You might want to increase the size of the team, but it's dependent on the situation.
If this episode was meaningful to you, be sure to follow us for more content about building a business. Thank you for listening to How Startups Grow.